Hey everybody, welcome to the About That podcast. I'm your host, Chantel Millen. This is just a place that we can talk about Jesus, crafts, DIY projects, marriage, and then there'll be just some random things sprinkled in between because as life would have it, there's always random stuff to talk about. In the last couple of weeks, we've been going through a series where we've been talking about acclimating to elevation. Basically, the preparation process that comes with preparing to have conditions in our life to change or for the Lord to elevate us. And so the first part of that series, we looked at Exodus 19, pretty much verses 12 through 24. And what we learned from that is that we are to set our own boundaries when it comes to preparing for elevation. Those boundaries are not things that the Lord is going to set, but that we are tasked to set those boundaries ourselves. Next with that is that after setting those boundaries, we have to make them clear and consistent. So we need to communicate them with the necessary parties, and then we need to be consistent with those boundaries whenever anyone tries to cross them. We need to be real consistent about not allowing that to take place. The other part that we see in our first part of the series was that everybody's not going to be able to go with us whenever that elevation begins to take place. We see where Aaron is allowed to go with Moses up the mountain, and so we can take comfort in knowing that we don't have to go alone, that the Lord will ordain people to take that journey with us. However, it may not be who we think it should be, and we need to know that decision is not based on title or rank or popularity or economic status or any of those things. It is simply a decision that the Lord has made. And so we have to be discerning and prayerful about knowing who those people are that should go and who those people are that shouldn't go. So then that took us to the second part of our series, which looked at the steps to take in preparing for the acclimation, right? So the first part of the series is adjusting our community. The second part was the actual steps to prepare. And so what we did was we looked at the process that professional climbers take in preparing to climb a mountain and compared those perhaps to what the Lord would want to share with us about our own preparation. And so there's like 7 or 8 steps. I won't go through all of them here, but I will encourage you to go and check out the second episode of this series, preparing for acclimation, and you'll see that it talks about drinking often, keeping warm so that we don't get frostbite, and so keeping on the full armor of the Lord, and having a pressure regulator. It talks about how climbers use stoves, that the stoves that they use have to have pressure regulators. And so in reading that, we see where it is necessary that when we're going through life, we know that pressures change, situations change, things come up. And so we have to have the Holy Spirit there to regulate us so that we can properly respond to those things, not out of our flesh, but out of our spirit and out of the strength of the Lord. So there's several things there. Go back, watch the episode so that you can get all of that information. Episode 1 and 2, actually. So that brings us to the final episode of the series. And this one is really more of just a word of caution. As we are preparing to elevate, we really need to recognize that there really are people who are not going to be able to go. And that's okay. It's not to say anything negative about their spiritual life, who they are, their relationship with the Lord. No, it has nothing to do with any of that. It's just simply a decision that the Lord has made because He is Alpha and Omega. He sees everything that's going to happen from beginning to end. And so He knows our journey, and He knows who's best suited. Looking at who they are as a complete person, He knows who's best suited to take that journey with us, right? And so if we don't consider who shouldn't go, right, there can be adverse effects on us if we take the wrong people with us. So I was thinking about, like, when you travel up a mountain, the air gets thinner, right? And if people are going with you up that mountain who have not prepared for that elevation, then they will struggle to breathe. They will struggle to function properly, to operate properly at that elevation. They will struggle to receive all that they need to receive there. They will struggle to acclimate to this new elevated place, right? And so eventually, like in an actual climbing situation, if you don't acclimate well to the thin air, and you begin to struggle to breathe, it can literally be life-threatening. And so if a person becomes dead weight, and you, the person being elevated, has to now do all that you are called to do, be all that you are called to be, but also carry the dead weight of someone who was with you because they went and weren't supposed to, it then threatens your elevation, right? Again, imagine climbing up a mountain and the person that's with you is not prepared, and they are no longer able to breathe. And so you're now having to regulate yourself, make sure that you're doing well, but also care for them, make sure they're doing well. It affects the climb. It affects being able to get to the end destination. And so you are basically left, right, doing all the work, but also having to carry the dead weight of another person, right? And what does that look like? It could look like always having to pour out, always having to be the one giving advice, always having to be the rescuer, always having to defend your newness, right? Like, I don't know if any of you've ever been in situations where as you are like changing things about yourself, making new habits, you're discontinuing doing or saying things that you used to do or say, there can be people in your life who don't always adjust well to your adjustment. And so it can feel like you're always having to defend your newness. You're always having to prove that you're this different person, right? And then God forbid you make a mistake because then it becomes, oh, but I thought like you were new. I thought you were saved, this, that, and the other, right? It can be draining. It can be very draining. And so again, we have to just make sure that we are not taking people that shouldn't go. We're not leaving behind people that are supposed to go, right? Because those that are supposed to go with you are going to be there to help. They're going to be there to encourage. It's going to be a flourishing relationship where both people are giving and receiving. I believe that's what the Lord would desire, especially in situations where you are, again, acclimating to the changing conditions in your life. And so with that, I'm praying that as you've hopefully listened to the first part of this and the second part of this, and you've now gotten to the third part of this, that you have taken a moment to actually pray and ask the Lord, are there people in my life who aren't supposed to go? As things are changing in my life, as conditions are changing, as you are elevating me, are there people with whom I am connected to, deeply connected to, that perhaps that relationship is no longer what you desire for me to be a part of? And if so, who are they? And then if you've identified those people, you then have a responsibility to release them with grace. Okay, very important, because what I don't believe the Lord would have happen is for you to sever that relationship in a way that removes glory from Him, right? I don't believe that He would ever have you to sever a relationship in a way that looks badly on Him, right? I recognize that there are some situations where, for example, in abusive situations, things of that nature, where you just need to get out and by all means do what's necessary. But sometimes there are just friendships where we are just going in two different directions, and we really just need to call it. And I believe there's a way to do that is graceful, that still honors the Lord, still respects that person. And so that's what I mean when I say release with grace. And so again, part of those steps would be to pray, ask the Lord who those people are, and ask Him for help, right? Like, Lord, help me to do this in a graceful way. Give me steps to make sure that I don't harm them, that I don't burn bridges in the sense that I don't remove future opportunities to be a light for you with them. right? And so ask him for that. And with that, set your boundaries and stick to them. For many of us, simply setting our boundary and sticking with it will cause those relationships that are no longer relationships we should be in, will cause many of them to sort of dissipate on their own, just from setting a boundary and stick to it. That distance will almost sort of create itself, which is perfectly fine. But if you find yourself in a situation where you do actually need to have a conversation, just please make sure that you do it with grace and you do it with humility. It's absolutely necessary, because again, you do not want to in any way shine a negative light on the Lord, or seem as though you are better than, or whatever the case might be. Like it definitely requires some humility and some grace. Now I'll say this last thing, and it's actually something that I didn't initially think about when the Lord was giving this to me, but I had a church member who came up to me after the service was over, and she was sharing her appreciation for the message. But then she said something to me that stuck out. And what she said was, as you were preaching, I found myself thinking or asking myself, could it be that I'm currently a part of someone's community and they need to distance themselves from me? And if so, like, how am I going to respond to that? And so as she said it, I realized that could very well be the case. It may not, or it can be an and, or both things could exist, right? It could be that there are people that we need to distance ourselves from, or whatever the case might be. But it could also be that there are other people that are being elevated, conditions in their life are changing, and the season for your friendship with them has ended, and you are part of the group that they need to release with grace. We're not exempt from that, right? And so what I bring that up because I think it is important that, again, we approach both sides of it from a place of grace and humility and understanding. Again, I believe in reason, season, and lifetime relationships, and we can talk about that another time. But I do recognize that there will be people who may have to release me with grace, or our friendship or relationship may distance over time, or whatever the case might be. And so recognizing that if and when that happens, don't take it personal. Don't take offense, right? Celebrate what the relationship was, give God glory for it, and then just recognize that God's will is now that it changed, the parameters of that relationship or that friendship change, and that again is totally okay. Totally okay. So I pray that over the last 3 weeks you've heard something that has been encouraging to you, or confirming for you, affirming, something that maybe just caused you to think, dig into your word, whatever the case might be. And I pray that you would act on it, walk it out, believe the Lord for the elevation, for the changing of conditions that I believe is coming, and take the time to really prepare for that, so that you can again operate well in the new space that he's going to place you in. And so again, I encourage you to comment, like, subscribe, all the podcast things. But I want to hear your thoughts. I want to hear, your agreements, your disagreements, your questions, all the things. I want to hear what you have to say. So enjoy your elevation, enjoy your changing of conditions, and just remember, whether you're being released from someone else's, as they elevate, or perhaps you're having to release someone else, to do that with grace and humility, making sure that we always glorify the Lord. So until next time, this is About That, and that's a wrap. Have a good night.